Bonjour, bonsoir à tous et à toutes. Bienvenue à cette deuxième journée de la conférence internationale d'Educate sur les Super Education Heroes et sur le rôle crucial de tous les héros de l'éducation pendant cette période de reconstruction post-Covid. Aujourd'hui également, nous avons les interprètes avec nous, donc si vous voulez suivre la version en anglais ou en français, vous choisissez la langue de votre choix en activant le bouton en bas de votre écran. Si vous souhaitez suivre la conférence dans sa version originale, alors vous n'activez pas de bouton et vous pouvez suivre comme ça. Mon nom est Marie Van Breda, je suis la coordinatrice d'Educate. Et hier, vous avez pu assister à la session plénière pour l'ouverture de la conférence. Si vous n'avez pas eu l'occasion d'y assister, pas de panique, vous retrouvez les enregistrements plus les présentations sur le site internet educate.be. Aujourd'hui, nous partons à la découverte des superheroes de l'éducation dans les différents pays en Afrique. Nous partons au Togo, au Rwanda et en Ouganda. La session à laquelle vous allez assister est co-organisée par Enable, Humanity and Inclusion et APF. La conférence est organisée par Educate avec l'appui de APF, VVOB et le gouvernement belge. Educate remercie chaleureusement tous les intervenants et ses partenaires. Pour la modération de cette session, je fais entièrement confiance à Iris Uitersprot, experte en éducation, formation et emploi chez Enable, à qui je vais bientôt donner la parole. Avant, je profite encore de quelques instants pour vous donner des informations d'ordre pratique. Donc, il vous est possible pour les participants de poser des questions via le chat. Donc, sur votre écran, vous avez à droite de votre écran, vous avez un bouton pour participer au chat. Vous y posez les questions et après les interventions, Iris répondra ensemble avec les intervenants à toutes les questions posées. N'hésitez pas à partager vos impressions via les réseaux sociaux avec le hashtag Education Heroes. Également pour aujourd'hui, les présentations et les enregistrements seront disponibles sur le site d'educate.be dès ce soir. Donc si vous voulez revoir, si vous n'avez pas pu assister à la séance, vous pouvez tout revoir ici et télécharger également les présentations. Alors, avant de démarrer, j'ai une petite question. Donc, on a activé un menti.com. Donc, pour le public, donc nous, on est vraiment très intéressés. On aimerait bien savoir d'où vous vous connectez. Donc, il y aura une question qui s'affiche si vous allez donc sur menti.com et vous utilisez le code 51 51 09 04. Normalement, c'est affiché sur votre écran, donc vous pouvez le voir. Et il y a une question qui est posée. D'où est-ce que vous vous connectez? Donc, je vois déjà les premières réponses. Avec les réponses, on va former un nuage de réponses et comme ça, on a une idée qui participe à cette session. Pour l'instant, je vois une personne qui a répondu, ou plusieurs personnes qui ont répondu, qui participent de la Belgique, de Bruxelles, plus précisément d'Ouganda. Bienvenue Ouganda. Kampala, Ouganda, Leuven, je pense que c'est Leuven, oui. Et donc maintenant, l'écran commence à se remplir et donc on va former un word cloud. Ça reste beaucoup d'intervenants. Belgique, Bruxelles, Brussels, dans les 3 langues évidemment. Kampala, Ouganda. Kigali, bienvenue Kigali. Italie. Alter. Donc voilà, on a une idée d'où vient notre public aujourd'hui. C'est une conférence internationale avec des intervenants et des intervenantes venant du continent africain et avec des participants qui participent du monde entier. Gand, je vois en plus se rajouter France, Rwanda. Voilà, je pense que vous avez eu le temps de répondre à cette question. Et reste à vous souhaiter une excellente session en présence de la modératrice Iris Uitersprot, à qui je vais laisser ma place. Bonne session.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's second session of the conference, Meet 3 Education Superheroes and Their Superpowers in Challenging Times. Today we will be listening to 3 different superheroes who will be talking about their experience on continuing education in challenging times. How have they kept education going? Which strategies have they used? Which tools have they used? And which of these strategies, tools, and innovations will they maintain after the challenge of post-COVID has subsided? We will first listen to superhero Augustine Saga, who is an itinerant teacher from Togo. An itinerant teacher is like a mobile teacher, a teacher on the road, who is bringing education to the children in difficult situations. Our second superhero today is Mr. Mugisha Kohans, a student teacher at the National Teacher College of Unyama in Uganda. Welcome, Mugisha. So Mugisha will share his experience as a student teacher and how he continued this training throughout the restrictions, movement restrictions and school closures by COVID-19. Our third and last superhero today is the Honorable Minister, Claudette Irere, Minister of State in charge of ICT and TVET in Rwanda. And she will actually talk about how the Rwandan education system responded to the challenges of COVID-19. I would like to welcome all the presenters today, and I will give the floor to Mrs. Saga, and who will be talking about the itinerant teacher system in Togo.
Bonjour, je suis Madame Saga Augustine, enseignante itinérante à l'inspection de Tone Est, au nord du Togo, dans la région des Savanes. Je vais, à travers cette présentation, vous partager les activités que je mène en tant qu'enseignante itinérante, les adaptations que j'ai dû apporter à ces activités lors de la fermeture des écoles en temps de Covid-19 et vous parler un peu des résultats obtenus à partir de ce système d'enseignants itinérants et les défis à relever. Mais d'abord, je vais vous situer par rapport au contexte de recrutement des enseignants itinérants dans notre région. Autour de l'année 2010, un constat a été fait par Handicap International et ses partenaires, comme quoi beaucoup d'enfants handicapés non scolarisés ont une déficience dite sévère. Donc, c'est le cas des enfants déficients visuels, des enfants déficients intellectuels et des enfants déficients auditifs. Donc, c'est vrai que dans certaines zones du Togo, on trouvait des élèves handicapés dans certaines écoles ordinaires, mais ces enfants étaient laissés pour compte et ils ne bénéficiaient pas vraiment d'un accompagnement ou d'un enseignement adéquat. Donc, ce qui faisait que leur taux de redoublement était tellement élevé et à la longue, les parents préféraient les retirer du cursus scolaire. Donc, il fallait agir en apportant d'autres ressources à l'école ordinaire pour renforcer ses capacités d'accueil des enfants handicapés. Donc, mais les élèves handicapés n'étaient pas tellement nombreux dans toutes les écoles pour penser à un dispositif en plein temps pour leur prise en charge. D'où l'idée d'un enseignant ayant des qualifications spécialisées qui se déplaceraient d'école en école pour appuyer le travail qui se fait déjà sur terrain dans les écoles ordinaires. C'est dans ce contexte que le système des enseignants itinérants a été mis en place pour promouvoir la scolarisation des enfants handicapés, leur maintien à l'école et aussi leur réussite scolaire en fin d'année pour une insertion sociale plus tard. Donc, l'itinérance de ce système consiste au fait que l'enseignant itinérant doit passer d'école en école pour apporter son appui ou son soutien aux élèves handicapés sur le plan pédagogique et sur le plan technique. Pour parler des activités que je mène en tant qu'enseignante itinérante, je peux les classer à 3 niveaux, voire même 4. Donc, le premier niveau, c'est à l'école. Donc, à l'école, dès la rentrée scolaire, je passe d'école en école pour vérifier la présence effective des enfants handicapés qui ont été déclarés ou qui ont été identifiés et inscrits ou bien orientés vers les écoles. Donc, après le constat, je profite de l'occasion aussi pour recenser les besoins en matière de formation des enseignants qui vont accueillir ces enfants et aussi les besoins en matériel pédagogique adapté. Donc, après le suivi éducatif, je procède à la sélection des élèves handicapés dont je prendrai la charge le long de l'année, des élèves handicapés que je vais accompagner le long de l'année. Donc, pour ce faire, je me base sur des critères qui ont été préalablement élaborés. Donc, les critères, c'est la sévérité de la déficience au niveau des enfants handicapés et puis le niveau de la classe de l'enfant. Nous privilégions les enfants du CP pour pouvoir les suivre, les accompagner jusqu'au CM2 et ainsi s'assurer que ces enfants seront maintenus au poste primaire. Donc, il y a aussi le niveau de soutien. Nous allons du niveau à fort jusqu'au niveau faible, en passant par le moyen. Donc, après la sélection des élèves handicapés à soutenir, je procède à la liste de ces enfants que je vais accompagner. Et cette liste contient toutes les informations sur l'élève et sur l'enseignant qui accueille l'enfant. Donc, en classe, je soutiens et l'enfant handicapé et les enfants et les enseignants qui les accompagnent, qui les ont en charge. Donc, le soutien à l'endroit de l'enfant handicapé se fait lors de nos passages dans les écoles. Donc, quand je programme les passages dans les écoles inclusives et quand j'arrive dans une classe, je me mets à côté de l'enfant handicapé pour l'aider à suivre au même rythme que les autres enfants de la classe. Donc, étant à côté de lui, je lui explique de temps en temps les consignes données par l'enseignant. Et je l'écoute aussi pour recueillir ses inquiétudes. Et puis, j'essaie de capitaliser les bonnes actions menées avec lui. Et aussi, je relève ses difficultés pour aller préparer une activité de remise à niveau. Et cette activité, je l'amène soit en famille, soit à l'école, en commun accord avec l'enfant lui-même. Et lors de mon passage en classe également, il y a des enfants dans la classe, s'il y a des enfants dans la classe qui ont des difficultés d'apprentissage, eux aussi, je les appuie de façon ponctuelle. Donc, ce n'est pas que les enfants handicapés que nous appuyons, mais aussi des enfants qui ne sont pas handicapés, mais qui n'ont aucune déficience, mais qui ont de grandes difficultés d'apprentissage. Donc, mes actions en classe aussi sont dirigées à l'endroit de l'enseignant titulaire de classe. Donc, je le suis pour voir, pour vérifier le débit de son langage, le niveau aussi de langage, pour voir si le niveau est adapté au niveau des apprenants. J'essaie de voir aussi sa position dans la classe. Est-ce que sa position permet que tous les enfants puissent le recevoir et recevoir le message comme ça se doit? Est-ce qu'il ne fait pas dos aux enfants en parlant? Est-ce qu'il arrive à oraliser toutes les activités qu'il mène, surtout au bénéfice des enfants déficients visuels? Donc, tous ces paramètres-là sont pris en compte lors de mes passages dans les classes. Je veille également à ce que l'enseignant soit assez explicite dans ses cours pour permettre, surtout aux enfants déficients et visuels que j'accompagne essentiellement, pour leur permettre de suivre et de se faire une idée matérielle du cours qui passe. Je recueille ensuite les difficultés de l'enseignant dans la transmission de son message et une fois à la maison, je réfléchis un peu aux solutions que je pourrais envisager pour le sortir de ces difficultés. J'appuie l'enseignant de classe dans la confection des fiches pédagogiques adaptées. Le troisième niveau de mes activités est en lien avec la famille de l'élève déficient. Là, mon travail est essentiellement basé sur la sensibilisation. Donc, lors de mes passages en famille, j'observe l'enfant dans sa relation avec les parents, dans sa relation avec ses frères, dans sa relation aussi avec les autres membres de la famille, s'il y en a. Et je donne quelques conseils pour un meilleur encadrement. Nous conseillons souvent les parents d'impliquer les enfants dans les activités, dans les tâches domestiques pour les préparer aussi à l'insertion sociale, parce que la vie n'est pas faite seulement que de l'éducation. Donc, toutes ces activités sont rendues possibles, toutes ces activités que j'ai citées sont rendues possibles grâce à une autre dimension de mon travail qui est la planification. Donc cette planification se fait lors des réunions de travail, lors des rencontres annuelles avec les autres enseignants itinérants et lors des réunions bilan au niveau de l'inspection avec les conseillers pédagogiques et l'inspecteur de l'inspection, le chef d'inspection. Et je ne peux pas négliger aussi l'apport de la formation continue que je fais dans les écoles spécialisées. Cela me permet de renforcer mes capacités et d'être de plus en plus efficace. Donc, voici un peu de façon ramassée les activités que je mène en tant qu'enseignante itinérante. Mais avec la fermeture des écoles lors de la période de Covid-19, j'ai dû modifier un peu ces activités pour pouvoir répondre aux besoins de l'heure. Les enfants handicapés oublient très souvent quand ils apprennent. Et quand ils font un long temps en dehors de l'école, à la reprise, il faut reprendre le début. Donc ça faisait qu'avec la fermeture des écoles, une inquiétude était née. on se disait, si nous restons, nous les laissons pour compte. Est-ce que à la réouverture, ils seront à même de pouvoir prendre le train en marche au même niveau que les autres enfants, vu que les autres enfants aussi bénéficiaient de la prise en charge de la part de leurs parents. Donc, j'ai dû faire une sélection des enfants que je devais appuyer lors de cette période, pendant cette période. Donc, la sélection s'est basée sur les critères comme le niveau de classe. Là, j'ai privilégié les enfants en classe d'examen, ceux qui étaient au CM2. Et les enfants qui sont vraiment faibles, donc ceux qui oublient vite, ce sont ces enfants-là que j'ai dû privilégier. Et j'ai refait le planning sur tous les jours ouvrables, couvrant toutes les matinées. Donc, toute la matinée, je passe dans une famille pour travailler avec l'enfant. Dans un premier temps, je passe le cours. Je passe le cours en réadaptant le programme de l'année. Je passe le cours et dans un second temps, je procède aux exercices pour m'assurer que l'enfant a pu retenir quelque chose. Donc, avec cette période, il fallait nécessairement passer par la sensibilisation avant l'action. Donc, j'ai pris eu 2 semaines de sensibilisation, de tournée de sensibilisation pour l'ensemble des enfants handicapés dont j'avais la charge, les sensibiliser aux gestes barrières et à l'occasion distribuer le kit d'hygiène qui a été doté par Handicapés International. Donc, c'est suite aux sensibilisations que le travail proprement dit a démarré. Et à l'ouverture des écoles, on a pu remarquer que les enfants handicapés étaient au niveau. Et à la fin de l'année, les résultats l'ont mieux prouvé. Donc, parlant des résultats, le système des enseignants itinérants a permis l'insertion sociale de beaucoup d'élèves depuis son démarrage. Donc, d'abord, les sensibilisations ont amené les enfants et les parents à envoyer plus leurs enfants à l'école. Or, auparavant, les parents avaient tendance à cacher leurs enfants handicapés dans les maisons. Aujourd'hui, grâce à ce système, les parents envoient leurs enfants à l'école et se sentent plus dégagés pour vaquer à d'autres occupations. Et ainsi, eux-mêmes sont plus épanouis. Donc, le système des enseignants itinérants a démarré sur une inspection de la région des Savanes avec 3 enseignants itinérants. Vu son efficacité, il a dû être dupliqué dans la région de la Kara avec 3 enseignants itinérants recrutés. Aujourd'hui, nous comptons 14 enseignants itinérants sur les 2 zones d'intervention du projet éducation inclusive, Savane et Kara. Mais je peux aussi ajouter le recrutement en cours des enseignants itinérants sur 2 nouvelles zones de la région des Savanes, donc agrandissant ainsi le nombre des enseignants itinérants à peu près 20. Donc, on pourra dire que c'est son efficacité et les preuves que ce système a apporté qui a permis qu'on passe à ce nombre en 10 ans. Donc, les résultats scolaires également des enfants handicapés ont évolué. Donc, si je prends l'exemple de l'année 2010, les enfants handicapés, le taux de réussite des enfants handicapés était très faible. Donc aujourd'hui, nous assistons même par endroit à 100% de réussite des enfants handicapés. Donc on peut dire que c'est une bonne chose à partir de ce système. Ce système a fait ses preuves au point où aujourd'hui, l'autorité a décidé de l'adopter comme un modèle de l'éducation inclusive au Togo. Donc, il y a eu l'élaboration des normes et standards de l'éducation inclusive partant du modèle du système des enseignants itinérants. En termes de défis par rapport à ce système, je dirais que nous avons besoin d'étendre le système partout où besoin est. Il y a un grand besoin sur terrain et un enseignant itinérant ne peut pas aller au-delà de 25 enfants handicapés ou soit il devient inefficace. Donc ça fait que nous ne couvrons pas tout le besoin et malheureusement certains enfants handicapés se trouvent en marge de cette prise en compte. Donc, la première des choses, le premier défi à relever selon moi, c'est d'étendre le système sur toutes les zones où il y a besoin, sur l'étendue du territoire. Mais je dirais que le plus grand défi est l'institutionnalisation de l'éducation inclusive. Si l'éducation inclusive est institutionnalisée, il y aura une direction de l'éducation inclusive au niveau central qui pourra prendre en compte toute la question relative à l'éducation inclusive et on aura des répercussions sur toute la ligne. En termes de défis également, je vais parler du cas des élèves déficients intellectuels. Nous éprouvons vraiment des difficultés dans leur accompagnement parce que chaque enfant déficient intellectuel représente un cas et il n'y a pas de guide, des manuels pour pouvoir s'appuyer sur ça et accompagner les enfants handicapés. Donc si vraiment on arrive à l'élaboration des manuels adaptés pour les enfants handicapés, ce sera vraiment un grand succès. Donc, je veux aussi parler de l'application des normes et standards de l'éducation inclusive. Ces normes ont déjà été élaborées, mais il reste leur application effective. Si on parvient à cette application, tous les enfants se sentiront vraiment à l'aise et ainsi on aura répondu à l'objectif de développement durable 4 qui veut que tous les enfants soient scolarisés. Et, bon, si je vais parler d'un vécu personnel, à mon niveau, je vais dire que j'ai beaucoup appris avec ce système. Aujourd'hui, j'ai réussi au concours de recrutement des conseillers pédagogiques et je m'apprête même à partir pour la formation de 2 ans avant de revenir en tant que conseillère pédagogique. Je peux dire que ce succès est en partie dû à ma participation active dans ce système des enseignants itinérants. La recherche quotidienne a permis vraiment que je forme ma personnalité. Et puis, ce système a en quelque sorte changé ma vision du monde. La manière dont je voyais le monde avant d'intégrer ce système, ce n'est plus la même chose. Aujourd'hui, je vois le monde avec un autre regard. Je vois vraiment le monde avec un autre regard. Et je vois que tout est vraiment possible quand on s'y lance, quand on a beaucoup de motivation en soi. Et ma réussite dans mes activités, dans mes tâches, je la dois à la motivation, à la grande motivation et à l'amour que j'ai pour les enfants handicapés. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup pour ce témoignage très sincère, très inspirant. Madame Sagan ne peut pas être avec nous aujourd'hui pour répondre aux questions, mais il y a avec nous Madame Bénédicte Larrey, spécialiste en éducation inclusive de humanité et inclusion à Togo. Madame Larrey, vous pouvez bien nous entendre?
Oui, oui, bonjour à tous, je vous entends très bien.
Ok, merci beaucoup. On n'a pas beaucoup de temps pour des questions maintenant. Ça se peut qu'il y aura des questions plus tard, après qu'on a entendu les trois panélistes. Mais il y a une seule question que j'aimerais vous demander, c'est à quelle fréquence est-ce que les enseignants spécialisés se rendent-ils dans chacune des écoles visées? Est-ce que vous pouvez répondre
Merci
très
bien.
brièvement à cette question? Merci.
Oui, oui. Merci bien pour cette question qui est pertinente. Il n'y a pas de périodicité fixe pour l'appui de chaque enfant handicapé dans l'école, mais c'est en lien avec le besoin spécifique d'appui pour cet enfant que dans le projet éducatif individuel, l'enseignant itinérant va poser sa périodicité. Donc, ça va de 3 fois par semaine à 1 fois par semaine. Et pour certains enfants qui sont maintenant au niveau un peu plus supérieur, niveau 4 ou niveau 5 du primaire, ils font même un appui 1 fois tous les 2 mois, quand effectivement l'enseignant titulaire de la classe dans laquelle est accueilli l'enfant handicapé est progressivement lui-même formé sur sa prise en charge. Donc, il n'y a pas de périodicité calée pour tous les enfants, c'est selon le besoin de chaque enfant et le niveau d'accompagnement qu'il faut pour chacun de ces enfants que l'enseignant itinérant va définir sa périodicité d'accompagnement. Voilà.
Ok. Merci beaucoup pour votre
réponse.
Vous voulez encore ajouter quelque chose?
Oui, c'était juste un petit détail pour dire que l'enseignant itinérant à la fois accompagne l'enfant, mais renforce l'enseignant titulaire de la classe. Madame Saga, qui vient de faire ce témoignage, a été d'abord une enseignante titulaire de classe soutenue par un ancien enseignant itinérant qui malheureusement est décédé. Et comme elle avait déjà toutes les billes pour soutenir les enfants handicapés, elle s'est proposée pour passer à ce poste d'enseignant itinérant et elle, à son tour, renforce les autres enseignants itinérants.
Ok. Voilà. Okay, merci beaucoup. I would like to remind everybody that you can post questions in the chat and we will ask those questions. We still have an opportunity to ask those questions at the end of the three speakers. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Mugisha Kohons, a student teacher at the National Teacher Training College of Unyama, Uganda. Mugisha, the floor is yours.
Right, thank you so much for the opportunity. We just could start this presentation in a few seconds. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kohens Bisha, and today we are discussing and sharing education heroes in challenging times. And the story that I'm going to share here is the digital journey of national teachers' colleges in Uganda. I am a student teacher at National Teachers College Unyama and presenting this on behalf of Enable in Uganda and the TTE project. And let's just get started with our story. Now, the TTE project, we may wonder what the TTE project is, but this is majorly to reinforce teacher training education in Uganda. And we'll continue to share more about what the TTE is and what it does. Going on, the Teacher Training Education Project, it was established purposely to reinforce teacher training education in Uganda. And these are some of the key facts that I would like to share with you so that you have a very good highlight about this project. So the TTE project is implemented in the 5 national teachers colleges and 21 partner secondary schools. As you can see in that beautiful map of the Pearl of Africa, you realize that those are the 5 NTCs in Uganda. But secondly, this program is implemented by the Ministry of Education and Sports with Belgian and Ugandan funding. So that's the very good collaboration that we have between Uganda and Belgium. Most important to note in our story, it is important to note that under the TTE project, there are 3 main components, of which each component has a specific focus. And one of them is infrastructure. So under infrastructure, under this component, we are looking at rehabilitation and extension of existing infrastructure, realizing that a very safe and enabling learning environment requires very feasible and very safe infrastructure. For example, classes, you are looking at facilities, and this is what we do. But secondly, we also have a component of institutional development, and this focuses on improving management practices by promoting digital transformation. It does not only stop at infrastructure, but we also go on to build capacity amongst, for example, college administrators, looking at trainings, for example, in the best practices and digitalization, for example, in financial management. And this is also another big component. But lastly here, another big component is on pedagogy. Under this, we are looking at capacity building for teacher training, that it is very key that we look at methodology, but also how best to empower teacher trainees and the educators to do well their job. Going forward, what does TTE do? So we do basically 5 things. Under this, 1, we design, looking at developing content, but 2, we are looking at building. We do construction, as we have already talked about infrastructure. We equip, train, and share. And through sharing, this really goes beyond internal sharing, and it goes into external sharing, as we shall be seeing in some of the activities that we do, how sharing really happens internally and externally. Going forward, now, you can already see that the TTE project is already shooting, but we may wonder, what is the trigger behind this kind of shooting? Now, we are going to look at COVID-19 as a trigger to use digitalization in national teachers' colleges here in Uganda. And now allow me right now interest you in the teacher training education history with this kind of timeline. Now, the establishment of national teachers' colleges happened in 1986. Later in 1992, there was curriculum development that was predominantly theoretical teaching. In 2011, there was support from TTE focusing on 2 national teachers' colleges out of the 5. But the good news is that later in 2017, this support from TTE extended to the 5 NTCs. This was a very good move by the TTE project. And now, in March 2020, quite absurd, but it's true and real, and we are dealing with it, there was school closure due to COVID-19. But our focus here would like to interest you under the intervention of TTE in 2011, there was a very big focus on active teaching and learning to shift and transition from the formerly theoretical kind of teaching and pedagogy to active teaching and learning. But also in 2017, when this support extends to the 5 NTCs, we also continue to trigger and focus on school practice and ICT in teaching and learning. As we continue with our story, we'd also like to talk about this support. Now, and this support is we are going to share it in 2 phases. One is prior to school practice closure, before schools were closed, but also look at when schools were closed, what really happened. Now, one of the activities that happened before school closure is that as TTE project, we are focusing on active teaching and learning. But secondly, looking at ICT in teaching and learning, looking at how best to blend ICT in teaching and learning to give birth to a hybrid kind of education. And then also school practice. So maybe to some of us, school practice here in Uganda is a kind of internship that teacher trainees must go through to be able to qualify. And then at a go, it is also considered as a part of, as a kind of assessment where they are assessed. And it is also something that they must really commit themselves to do to the end. Now, in March 2020, this kind of animal COVID-19 steps in and schools are closed. Now, what happens? Of course, there is a lot of hopelessness. We see desperation. Students, over 15 million here in Uganda, young people, were forced to go back home because there couldn't be any more schooling amidst COVID-19. But then what does TTE do in order to revert and avert some of these challenges and make sure that we continue learning? So efforts were made to ensure continuity of learning in national teachers' colleges here in Uganda. And how did this happen? This was through the development of the TTE sandbox. What's just a big milestone? We were just that hopeless, but thank God that this intervention was done, and we will see how helpful it has been. Okay, so the TTE sandbox. What is the TTE sandbox? So this is the starting point to ensure continuity of learning. It was indeed the first point. Now with the TTE sandbox, the project aims to improve content and processes in the national teachers' colleges by trying different education technologies together as a fast-track response. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a fast-track response because this COVID-19 came unprecedented, and it was very critical for TTE to intervene and make sure that students, for example, those that were in their final years, do not skip some of the critical stages of their education. And that is why these efforts were made, and it was a fast-track response. Going forward to share part of our story. Now, the TTE sandbox, still to take you deep into it and so that you understand it. Now, we have key sandcastles of the TTE sandbox, and these are the following. One, we have the help desk. So under the help desk here, we have NTC lecturers who excel at ICT in supporting their peers. So there is a very strong peer-to-peer support system. You will hear some of these lecturers being labeled as ICT champions, others, they are digital ninjas. You know, those are good labels that, you know, motivate them after they have excelled in these practices. So they share, and then later, we also have another castle of communities of practice. So this has been done through video conferencing to introduce the staff to education technologies. So in this is now where we continue to share very critical and important digital skills and knowledge. And from there, we have lessons development. After lecturers sharing together, they developed lessons. And this is what helped students to continue learning amidst the lockdown of schools. But most interesting is that we also have this castle of the one-stop portal. Very incredible resource. This has made resources and learning materials for staff and students in these NTCs very accessible. And we continue to share our story. Ladies and gentlemen, in this, we are going to take just a quick look inside the TTE sandbox. What is inside this box? And we are going to focus on distance learning opportunities for the student teacher trainees. What were some of the benefits or the opportunities for the student teacher trainees? In this, looking at the opportunities for student teacher trainees, one was the ICT masterclasses. So these were weekly practical sessions on how to use ICT tools in education. In this, we also had very student teachers from all the 5 NTCs and all their lecturers come and gather in one virtual space to share, to be trained on some of these educational tools that we are using to make sure learning continues. But the second thing here is the GTM e-learning course. So the General Teaching Methods course was the very first online in the teacher training in Uganda. I would like you to really applaud this effort. It was the very first online course in teacher training in Uganda. Very amazing job there. Now, continuing, we are going to also still look at another important activity, and these were the digital lessons. So digital lessons were developed by lecturers in the format of screencasts, ebooks, and podcasts. And this was very helpful that these were uploaded on the sandbox and students could be able to go, read through, download, watch, and listen to these lessons developed by our own lecturers. And it was a very, very inspiring move for us. Another important thing to note on opportunities is that we had lecturers as role models, modeling the use of education technology through our very educators. This is very important, that even when we must talk about things, we look at our educators as our role models. To myself, I really was inspired, I think after like 3 weeks of closure, I really couldn't think that continuing with learning would be possible. But I think there is one lecturer by name of Okelo Daffin. And then she sent us a video on WhatsApp. And I was like, okay, so learning may continue. And she was giving us a plot of a particular literature text. And I was like, okay, this is something promising. And then soon it was the Google Classroom and I was in. So I was so much motivated to know that even when we are here desperate, our lecturers, our educators are not seated, they are thinking about us so that we continue learning. And this really inspired me a lot and I could not stop. I just couldn't wait emulating the same. And as I speak, I also share maybe a personal experience that I am running some mentorship class for young people. And I've been able to use most of these things in my mentorship classes and sessions. So that is the role of lecturers as role models. Continuing in this, there is a study that has been done on e-learning readiness. And this was conducted by Ipsos in December 2020. So we would also like to share with you some of these findings. They are going to be shocking, but inspiring at the same time. Now, here we are going to look at students' participation in distance learning during school closure. What really happened, or what are these findings? Looking at the graphical presentations here, you'll realize that 62% of the students participated in distance learning, while 38% did not. Yes, there is a gap. You can see it. 62% were able, while 38% were not able to participate in learning. You could be thinking maybe what stopped the 38%. We will dive into that later. But also, participation in distance learning was found to be higher among female students with 65% than male students at 60%. Yes, as we have heard from the previous story, there are always gender inequalities. All these are gaps that we think we can be able to bridge if we become to make things really happen. Everything can be made possible. Still on the findings, in this study, we also take time. However much we were helped as students, the teachers made efforts, TTE project made this intervention, providing data to the lecturers to make sure this process continues. It is very important, like every other journey, to reflect on some of the stumbling blocks or the challenges of what really hindered the 38%
I'm sorry,
participating.
Mr. Mugisha, Can I just briefly interrupt you here? It is very important that we stick to time. So can you maybe wrap up, because we want to leave time for 1 or 2 questions as well. So can you wrap up your presentation in the following 2 minutes, and then I will ask you 1 or 2 questions, and then we need to move on to the third speaker. I'm sorry about this.
Okay. Just some of the reasons. One is that we have lack of tools, looking at laptops, smartphones, and the rest, but also we have no or limited data. Some of the students really lacked communication. So these are some of the reasons that were shared during this time. But also, as we celebrate, we believe that students and teachers from national teachers' colleges remain our education heroes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come from far, but we still have a long journey to go. And we are going to also to share briefly about our digitalization in education as a new standard in NTCs. A point of reflection: some journeys take you further from where you come from, but closer to where you belong. And we believe that is where we belong as NTCs. Now, our journey continues, and these are some of the things that we think that even after COVID-19, these things will continue to happen. One is the development of distance learning lessons. We have the ICT skills. We have mindset and motivation, the help desk peer support system, and the ICT masterclasses and communities of practice. Ladies and gentlemen, our next destination, there is where we want to be. And these are some of the things that we intend to continue and continue to implement. One is the technology enhanced learning course, which is going to be a very interesting space for both lecturers and students. But 2 are the educational hackathons to encourage innovation in education, and then the learning management system, in addition to those that we have always had. Also, there is an ICT device leasing scheme that is going to be implemented, and we'll have maybe time to talk about that. And then the digital hub that will also continue to spur innovation, but give more space to the students and lecturers to be able to practice and share skills in this. Lastly, as I conclude, it will be important for us to share with you the key takeaways from our digital journey. What have we learned? In terms of participation, we learned that it is very key for us to involve students, to get them into the problem so that we get solutions all together. Secondly, is to motivate them through hackathons, the challenges, bootcamps, and any other digital events. And then 3 is to continue to have peer support, set up a peer-to-peer support system to encourage teamwork and collaboration in this kind of fight. And then next is to be a role model about mindset. So to walk the digital talk would also continue to inspire other people. And then next is that we explore and discover. Try and explore. It is okay to fail. This is part of the learning process. So let's not be afraid of trying. As we come to end on accessibility also, it is important to focus on smartphones, or what really works for any country, because we believe that smartphones are the most accessible and affordable devices for students. And here on accessibility, we should also make efforts to look at offline access to cater for connectivity issues in remote areas. Ladies and gentlemen, I really would like to thank you and wish you the very best. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mugisha. I'm afraid we won't have time for questions at this point, but we will come back with some questions at the end of all 3 presentations. But thanks a lot for sharing this very interesting sandbox experience in Uganda. And good luck with keeping training of teachers going. Thank you. I will now give the floor to Rwanda, to the Honorable Minister Claudette Irere, Minister of State for ICT and TVET, that is Technical and Vocational Education and Training, who will talk about the response of the Rwandan education system to COVID-19. Ms. Claudette Irere, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elise, for giving me the opportunity to share a few things that I think that Rwanda did, and I could either, be of help to other countries as they thrive to continue education even during these challenging times. And like anyone else, in March 2020, in Rwanda, we had the first case of COVID, and it was time for us to close schools. So we sent all the children back home, and we closed all the schools as well as, all other economic activities. But now the question remains, for how long should we keep closing the schools? And when would we be able to reopen again? And while we close them, what should we be doing for us to keep the momentum and to keep engaging the students to ensure that they do not lose the most out of these forced holidays, you'd call them. The COVID-19 pandemic and education challenges, as you might have heard, probably even from Cohen's and other people, the question of connectivity and devices for teachers and students was the biggest one. Yes, we had, the government of Rwanda had worked so hard since 2000 to establish what you would call a national strategy for ICT. And it was in phases. We started with ensuring that we have institutions and we train the people to be able to take care of, whatever we would be investing in the future. And then the second phase now was really investing in the infrastructure, ensuring that connectivity is rolled throughout the country, and ensuring that all the main sectors are also connected. And education was among all these sectors that were connected. We kept on investing, in data protection, data storing, and everything else around that. And we even went further and started equipping some of the schools with devices. Started off with what we called one laptop per child, and then we went on, the concept evolved, and we started now ensuring that at least each of the schools has what we call smart classrooms. And these are classes, physical classes that are set up within each school to help not only students, but also teachers to have access to these devices, to teach as well, but to also have access to information that they might need. But now with COVID, students and teachers were not able to go back to school and use these devices. And we could not even have them distributed to all the students. They could not even, they could have not even been enough. Now, teachers did not have devices as well. And so this became a very big challenge. The second thing was on content. Our general education mainly had done a lot of work in ensuring that we have digital content and put on platforms that are accessible. And this came in handy. However, when we say inclusive, is to make sure that everyone has access to this content. And this was not the case. students with disabilities could not have access to this content, and people with challenging or low levels of digital literacy could not as well have access to this. And so we came up with other ways of having them interact with some sort of learning and something that they could have access to. And like I just said, levels of digital literacy, mainly among teachers, were also a hindrance and a challenge during this pandemic. Now, what are some of the strategies that we put in place to ensure that teaching and learning continues even during lockdown and even with these challenges that I just talked about? One, as we could not rely on everyone having a device where they could keep, making sure that they keep learning or are able to teach, we resorted to alternative means of broadcasting lessons. And so radios and TVs came in handy, and we started producing content that would be aired both on radios and TVs. And this same content would also be put on our YouTube channels to make sure that people that at least still have access to internet would still go back and be able to get the content. Another form of a channel that we used was to set up what we call short code. In Rwanda, you'll find that many people, even though they don't own a smartphone, but they own a little phone that we call, a feature phone, that most probably anyone that has used a phone back in the days has had. And you'll find that most countries in Africa are so good at using and taking advantage of these feature phones. And so we created a short code, and we put different content, interactive content, where students would go and specify what tier they're in and have access to some form of content, be it mathematics, be it around biology, be it even in TVET, we put some content that students could have access to. And we had some people really working hard in the background to make sure that the content is changed and is interactive as much as possible. Another form of platform that was used, of course, for university students mainly, and also for secondary students, there were e-learning platforms, including the one that I mentioned, that the General Education uses. And even though these platforms maybe did not have inclusive content, which challenged students could not have access to, but for students that could have access to them, and maybe were challenged with just affordability of internet, telecom companies came in handy here and zero-rated all the e-learning platforms in the country, making sure that students have access to these e-learning platforms. Many of our universities kept their doors open, or kept teaching and learning. It continued because of this facilitation by the telecommunication companies. Another channel that was used, and I talked about it, was to leverage social media, most especially YouTube channels. For anyone that probably would have missed the lessons and wanted to, on TV or radio, or even on some of the e-learning platforms, they could go back and look at the YouTube channels that different institutions had put up, and make sure that they still have access to the content. And another activity that was conducted because of the lower levels of digital literacy among our teachers was to ensure that there's a bit of continuity in training our teachers. And this was done, as well on the online platform, making sure that we had during the first, I would say last year, more than 7,000 teachers that were trained online, because we had to make sure that should this pandemic last longer, because no one knew really when was open, that the teachers are at least given some of the skills that they need to teaching. Now, besides, some of the things that we did to make sure that, or some of the strategies that we put in place to make sure that we continue teaching during the different lockdowns that we had, or the different times where the schools were still closed. Besides that, we used the lockdown or the impasse that the whole world really was in to build or to increase the number of classrooms. In just 1 year, we were able to add 22,500 classrooms to the existing classrooms that we had. And this was to respond to the need of social distancing and also reducing distance to schools for students. So social distancing for when students would go back to school, and also at the same time ensuring that distance to schools is reduced. But there are also many other challenges that building these classrooms was really responding to. First was to make sure that there's some form of jobs, because this was done all over the country. Continuing with construction, make sure that people were working and were being paid. And two, despite the challenging times that we're in, two, yes, responding to the social distancing need once the classrooms would open, and at the same time reducing distance to schools, but also responding to the issue of overcrowding that we previously had, and that we'll probably keep having at some point. But this was really, I would say, a shot in the arm, and it really was helpful during that time. Other things that we did, we continued our journey to make sure that more schools are connected. And this would allow us to have at least 80% of the schools connected by 2024. Today, we have around close to 60% connected. So we continued our journey, and we're still continuing to make sure that most schools are connected. Another thing that we did was, because we realized that our e-learning platforms, they had not been used before, as much as were used during lockdowns, and we use this time to also upgrade our e-learning platforms in all levels of education. You'll find that most of the universities did not pay attention to e-learning. This time, they're going into a hybrid mode of learning, of teaching. Or they're really, some of the classes are shifted online just to ensure that people do not meet in one area. And also the development of inclusive digital content and revision of programs. And of course, this here, you will agree with me, with COVID, many people realized some of the programs that we had, that we were teaching, yes, they were still relevant, but we could add a little bit more. For instance, making ICT compulsory, starting from primary 3 or primary 4, making sure that these skills are ingrained in students as they grow up. So we did a little bit of tweaks and changes on the programs to ensure that what matters most what we saw, where gaps were, we are able to ensure that that does not happen again. Another thing that we did was to ensure that going forward, things that we're doing, manually, being collecting data, recruitment of teachers, everything that were really manual, everything now is shifting online because we realize that these things are possible, and should anything happen, we do not want to stop collecting data because we cannot send people on the field. And the last thing that we did was to redesign some of the schemes for device acquisition for most of our students and also for the teachers, ensuring that going forward, we really look into how we make sure and make it easy for our students and teachers to acquire these devices. And the last slide that I want to end with is now the focus on the post-COVID pandemic era. What are we doing going forward? And I think I just talked about a few things, in the previous slide. One, we want to keep ensuring that access, quality, and relevance are at the heart of our education system. This means that should anything like COVID-19 happen, we must be prepared, and we must ensure that students and teachers equally still have accessibility to content and have adequate devices and can have quality, be it courses and programs, and relevance given the times that we're in. We will continue to encourage, especially many higher learning institutions, to have a blended mode of teaching and learning. Yes, it's good to have physical classrooms, but it's even better when you can take some of the classes online. And that reduces the pressure on your infrastructure anyways. Since we've seen that establishing physical smart classrooms was probably not a good idea responding to the challenges that we had during the pandemic, we're rethinking what a smart classroom should mean going forward, and looking into probably turning some of the classes into virtual laboratories so that students have access to even more content and are exposed to even advanced technologies. And then another thing, because we realize that teachers are at the core, they're the core, I would say, members of the education sector. We realize that giving them a blended approach of training for their continuous professional development is the way to go. That means what? As they get recruited, what kind of training are we giving them? And how do we assess that? 2 years down the road, how are they doing? And how do we create a package that they continue following even while they are at work or in service, and even pre and after, making sure that we continue to have teachers that could face any challenge and that provide relevant and quality education. I thank you all for your kind attention, and thanks, Iris, for the opportunity to share what Rwanda has done.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for this presentation of the response of the Rwandan education system to COVID-19, which seems fairly advanced. A few questions have come in for you. I will pick one for you right now, and then we will move into the general question and answer session. One question is about how does this scheme for the acquisition of devices actually works? So it's one of the elements one of the strategies that you have mentioned. So how does this scheme actually work? And then maybe you can also answer to the question, which e-learning platforms have been used in Rwanda? Are there multiple e-learning platforms? Any specific platforms can you clarify? Over to you, Honorable
Thank you.
Minister. Yeah.
On the acquisition of devices, I don't think I'm allowed to share the details yet. But in a nutshell, previously we had a scheme where we would just distribute devices and let students pay once they are done with schools. And you will find that many students, even today during the pandemic, they kept asking, where are the devices, where are the devices? And this scheme was not working. And so we redesigned a new one, and details are yet to be shared. This goes hand in hand with rethinking the smart classroom idea, given that we were not able to have access to them during the pandemic. And two, what platforms? Different schools or universities develop their own platforms. I think the general one that people know about is with our Rwanda Education Board. If you go on the website, I'll probably type that in the chat box. This was one that was accessed by many people, and even outside the country, because it has a lot of content, and anyone could have access to it. And so it's with Rwanda Education Board, and I'll share the details in the chat box. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that information. I will now actually ask questions to each of you, maybe starting with Mugisha. Mugisha, one question that has been on my mind the whole time, both during your presentation and the presentation of the Honourable Minister, is on the quality of the actual training and learning objects. So clearly there has been a lot of investment in developing these learning objects, in developing lessons and sharing them online. But what about the quality of the formats of these lessons? Especially in Uganda, you have been investing in active teaching and learning, which requires interaction between teacher and student, or between teacher trainer and student teacher. So has there been interaction? Are these formats truly interactive? And how do you ensure they are good quality and that they are motivating trainees and learners to keep their attention, to maintain their attention to the lesson? Over to you, Mugisha.
All right, thank you so much, Iris, for that question. A very good one there. So here in Uganda, to make sure that we keep relevant, basically looking at quality, it has been done in a way that it is more interactive, as there is a big focus on active teaching and learning. So even the tools that have been used, they are more interactive. Looking at the podcasts, looking at the videos that are created, looking at screencasts, I am virtually interacting with my teacher via a screencast. So even to the quality, given the help of the help desk, the quality has been up to point that we really appreciate that. So using the podcasts, and you find that even mostly learners, different kinds of learners are catered for. Looking at the visual learners, you look at the, if you can't really, if you're a good reader, then you will download PDFs, and this has been really helpful. I know that most of the learners have really been catered for using these interactive tools, but also using other spaces like Google Classroom and WhatsApp, which are more, reliable to the learners. I believe, yes, there is something missing, but we believe that for now, these have been really very robust moves that we think can be enhanced in in the subsequent strategies that are being laid forward.
Okay, thank you, Mugisha. Honorable Minister, I don't know if you can answer to the same question. Are the formats interactive? Can learners actually ask questions during the lesson? Can the teacher respond to these questions? What is the level of interaction in the formats of the online learning objects?
Yes, in the online learning platforms, yes, there are ways you can interact with the teachers, be it chatting with them directly because there's a chat box, or sending an email if it's something that you really need a big response to. And for the e-learning platforms, mainly the ones that we used by higher learning institutions, many of them use Moodle that probably is very common. And they were done in a way that they could interact with students easily. So the interaction has been great, yes. And two, many of the professors, mainly at the university level, they continue to give lessons using, yes, be it Teams, Microsoft Teams, or Zoom, or many of the platforms that were used, and they could have these interactive sessions with the students, and so many students seem to prefer that. Of course, this does not come without their challenges, but it gives at least some form of familiarity that you're in a classroom and you can easily interact with the professors. As for the TV and radio, as you can tell, these were pre-recorded sessions, and that's why we resorted to have the content that was produced put on YouTube channels. And anyone that would have any question would always, make a comment, and it would be responded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Une dernière question pour Madame Larrey. Vous avez parlé, ou Madame Saga a parlé des défis du modèle d'enseignant itinérant. Alors, je suis intéressée de savoir le futur. Quel sera le futur du modèle d'enseignant itinérant? Est-ce que ça sera adopté ou est-ce que ça a déjà été adopté par les autorités? Est-ce qu'il y aura une continuité du modèle pour les années à suivre? Est-ce qu'il y a une possibilité d'une mise à échelle de ce modèle? Je vous laisse la parole.
Oui, merci pour la très bonne question. Concernant le modèle d'éducation inclusive au Togo, nous pouvons dire que ce dispositif est déjà accepté et adopté par l'État togolais. Déjà, c'est intéressant de savoir que tous ces enseignants itinérants mis à disposition sont en fait des enseignants fonctionnaires de l'État mis à la disposition pour le dispositif. Et donc, s'ils n'étaient pas dans cette politique, ils n'auraient pas accepté et progressivement augmenté le nombre d'enseignants itinérants qui assurent la mise en œuvre de ce dispositif. Oui, la mise à l'échelle est déjà presque acquise au niveau du Togo. Il faut savoir que nous travaillons avec d'autres ONG qui ont également commencé à mettre en place ce dispositif dans d'autres régions du pays. Et donc, plan international a essayé de mettre en place ce dispositif dans la région centrale. La Coalition nationale éducation pour tous a également mis en place ce dispositif dans la région des plateaux. Et Handicap international, humanité et inclusion intervient dans 2 régions, donc celle de la Savane et de la Kara. Il ne reste que la région maritime, qui est la région capitale du pays dans laquelle ce dispositif n'est pas encore mis en place. Il faut aussi relever que dans notre plan sectoriel de l'éducation, le dispositif d'enseignants itinérants est le modèle retenu pour la duplication, la généralisation de l'éducation inclusive au Togo. Donc, il reste qu'au niveau de la société civile, nous accompagnons, nous soutenions ce dispositif au niveau étatique et je pense que le principe, il est déjà acquis. L'autre réflexion qui se mène au niveau central, c'est voir au-delà de ce dispositif d'enseignants itinérants, comment commencer également à réfléchir à d'autres dispositifs. Et le second dispositif qui est finalement proche de ce dispositif d'enseignants itinérants, c'est celui des classes transitoires d'inclusion scolaire concernant les enfants avec déficience intellectuelle. Madame Saga le relevait, il y a beaucoup plus de challenges à ce niveau et je pense que le politique va se pencher également là-dessus. Voilà, merci.
Okay, merci beaucoup, Madame Larrey. I would like to thank all of you, but before we move out, I would like to give a few key takeaways from this session. Clearly, COVID-19 has been an enormous challenge for educators and learners and teacher trainees alike. We are very happy to have heard the experience of the heroes today. They have made it possible to make education and teacher training accessible in spite of the huge challenges imposed by the pandemic, and thereby reducing the negative impact of school closures and reducing the learning loss for generations of children. On the plus side, we have witnessed in both Rwanda and Uganda how COVID-19 actually has triggered innovative technologies to ensure access to education and teacher training during times of school closure. And these technologies are very promising for the future of education and training, even long beyond the pandemic. Of course, provided that measures are taken to bridge the digital divide. So we have seen there is still special measures that need to be taken to reach more vulnerable students or students in remote areas or students who do not have access to internet or digital equipment. We have seen that in the case of Rwanda, revamping all the technologies such as television or radio and putting them to use for educational purposes makes it possible to reach to those more vulnerable categories of students and teacher trainees. COVID-19, of course, has had a more severe impact on the most vulnerable children and children whose access to education was already challenged before the pandemic, as we have seen in the case of Togo, for example, children with learning difficulties, children with disabilities. And in order to ensure their equitable access to education, both during and beyond the pandemic, we will have to keep investing in made-to-measure solutions, both of a technological nature and more simple but effective models as the itinerant teacher model that we have seen in Togo. Thank you very much to all three panelists, superheroes. I wish you a lot of success with your onward journey in maintaining the continuity of education, ensuring it is accessible to all and ensuring that it is of high quality, ensuring the best of possible learning outcome for your learners and for the next generations of learners. I would also like to thank the audience for listening in today and for sharing questions. My apologies if we have not been able to pose every single one of them, but I hope most of them have been answered. Thank you very much for your participation today. Thank you.
Au nom de Educate, je tiens à vous remercier les intervenants pour vos témoignages passionnants. Mugisha, merci beaucoup. Madame Saga, merci beaucoup. Madame Larrey, merci beaucoup aussi en venant du Togo. Madame Irere, ministre d'État rwandais, merci beaucoup pour votre intervention. Je remercie aussi le public, même si Iris l'a déjà fait tout à l'heure. Et je tiens à remercier Iris Uitersprot qui a mené cette session de main de maître. Donc merci beaucoup à Iris. Je voudrais aussi vous rappeler que demain, on continue la conférence sur les Education Heroes. On vous amène sur le domaine de l'enseignement d'apprentissage en Afrique. Il est encore temps de vous inscrire pour cette session qui a lieu demain, même heure, même lieu, mais d'autres personnes qui interviendront. Vendredi, notre dernier jour, vous amènera en Asie du Sud-Est. Il est toujours temps de vous inscrire aussi pour ces sessions via notre site internet educate.be. À partir de ce soir, vous trouverez toutes les présentations d'aujourd'hui et l'enregistrement de la session d'aujourd'hui sur le site internet. Donc, je vous invite à re-regarder ou à visionner ou à télécharger les présentations. Et n'oubliez pas de continuer de communication via les réseaux sociaux en utilisant le hashtag Education Heroes. Je vous dis aux intervenants, bonne continuation et au public, à demain. Merci beaucoup.